Hey guys, tonight we're walking quietly through a monastery where words are precious and food is more precious still. The brothers keep the great silence, but their footsteps speak. Along cool cloisters, beneath rafters that smell of oak and grain dust, toward storerooms where winter air hangs like a curtain. In years of plenty, the monastery hums like a beehive. In years of failure, late frosts, sour rains, blight, its hum becomes a careful counting. Ladles meet bowls, scales tilt by candlelight. A bell marks the hour and the ration, the prayer and the cart that leaves for the next hungry hamlet at dawn. You'll hear nothing dramatic here, only the soft choreography of survival, where ledgers, ropes, and baskets are as holy as books, and where charity must be measured so tomorrow is still possible. Breathe slow, the corridors are cool, and the oil lamps is steady. We will walk the logistics of mercy.
In a famine year, the monastery's most eloquent object is not a book, but a ring of keys. They hang from the cellarer's belt, a small constellation of iron, worn smooth by years of turning. Each key belongs to a threshold, the west granary's outer door with its iron strap, the lock on the rye bin, the hasp guarding dried broad beans, the cool cellar where onions braid from rafters and roots settle into straw-lined pits, the smokehouse where a faint, clean tang reminds you that preservation is time made edible. In a silence, these keys speak for the community, what may be opened, how much may pass through, and how long the stores must last. The cellarer is not a character for drama, but a steward of arithmetic. His abacus, tallies scratched onto a wax tablet, notched sticks draped with cord, turns harvest into days. He measures not only pounds of barley, but the hours those pounds will feed. Facing a winter of crop failure, he lays out his small world, a population of brothers and lay servants, a trickle of travelers, and a growing line of villagers at the gate. To each he assigns a number, to each number a measure, to each measure a span of weeks until spring sowing can be risked. He guards the seed grain like a candle cupped against the wind. Charity given today must not extinguish the future. In this economy, silence helps. Without negotiation crowding every doorway, rules can stay steady. The rule of the house, whispered in gestures and understood in the rustle of robes, is that food is a sacrament of order, each bowl filled to the same line, each loaf cut to the same finger width. The refectory's long tables do not know favorites. In better seasons, the monastery may give a second ladle without counting. In a lean year, the second ladle is a letter, to be written, carried, and answered by tomorrow's stock. The granaries themselves are part of the language. They are built against the sun, with narrow slits higher than a man, eaves that keep water marching away, and floors raised off the earth on mushroom-shaped piers to deter rats and damp. Inside, grain sleeps under linen covers, sometimes with bay, wormwood, or mint stirred in, old beliefs that some sense confuse pests. The cellarer listens to grain the way a monk listens to psalms. He cups a handful and lets it run back in a thin stream, hearing whether it rattles dry or clumps with hidden moisture. He breathes near it. Has the sting of mold crept in? He turns sacks. He moves boards. He remains patient because haste costs more than it saves. Rations shrink by ritual rather than panic. The bread changes from white to brown, to mixed, barley and rye, then perhaps pea meal to stretch the crumb. The loaf grows denser, and the knife moves with more attention. Ale is thinned to small and smaller, not to punish, but to spread calories as evenly as light along a corridor. In the kitchen, a brother stirs pottage that has become a ledger in a pot. Cabbage leaves salvaged from outer wilt, a fist of oats, a bone boiled again because every simmer draws something more. Salt is counted, pepper is forgotten, herbs do the work of hope. The almonry becomes the hinge between inside and out. A lay brother opens the wicket to a procession of faces, some familiar, some blown in from hunger from outlying farms. A slate records names where names can be known. Where they cannot, a mark stands for a man, and a different mark for a family. The measures given at the door are carefully chosen. Bread for today, not flour that could be hoarded and spoiled. A ladle of stew while it's hot and safe, not raw beans that might sicken the desperate if undercooked. The monastery's charity is not stingy. It is shaped to reduce waste and harm. The almoner's hands are constant, his eyes often wet. He has learned to hold both sorrow and instruction in the same gaze, to show a mother how to soak and simmer, to whisper a sign for the infirmary when someone's breath rattles thin. Transport is part of this liturgy. Before dawn, carts are loaded in the yard under stars, wheels checked, axles greased with fat saved since autumn, ropes retied. The brothers work by lantern and memory. Each road is a thread they have walked in all weathers. They know where a cart will bog in late winter thaw, where a bridge shivers, where a slope demands wedges under the wheels. Donkeys shift their weight, patient. On bad days, two brothers take a handcart instead. The squeak swallowed in fog as they lean into the wooden handles, and the world moves inch by inch. They carry not abundance, but reliability, a fixed weight of bread and a reassurance that tomorrow will be like today, which in famine is brace. In the counting house, a different kind of load is balanced. The bursar sits with the prior, not to hoard silver, but to translate it into calories. A miller's toll can be reduced. A small parcel of woodland can be traded for a fisherman's right to net in the pond, where carp glide like winter coins beneath thin ice. A local lord is petitioned for remittance of rent. In return, the monastery pledges seed loans when spring turns the color of courage. The scriptorium prepares letters with cool ink and hot intent. Seals are warmed at the brazier and pressed with care. The wax holds a promise others can trust. Within the walls, discipline protects the future. The seed loft is locked under two keys, the cellarers and the priors. Each must be present to open it, and their silence at the threshold is a form of oath. Twice each week, the cellarer and his assistant walk the perimeter, inspecting what seems to need no inspection. The hinges oiled, the thresholds swept, the air holes clear. A blocked vent can mean a spoiled bin. A spoiled bin can mean an empty month. They tap, listen, lift, reseal. It is not drama. It is devotion. At the infirmary, broth is medicine, and spoonfuls are time. The healer knows that sudden fullness can kill a starving body. She has seen the dangerous light come back too quickly to a man's eyes, and has measured recovery in teaspoons and whispers. She keeps a ledger of rest. Who eats how often? Who needs warmth? Who must be kept from work until sinew learns to trust again? In her quiet, logistics become tenderness. Cups warmed before filling, blankets rotated towards the hearth and back again. The room's drafts mapped and tamed by a curtain pinned at the right angle. The monastery communicates its changing rules through simple signals. One lantern on the refectory shelf at dusk means rations remain as yesterday. A lantern turned sideways means the ladle will be smaller by a finger. In the stables, a white cloth tied to a beam tells the carter which route is passable after the thaw. These codes keep questions scarce, freeing hands for work and minds for prayer. Silence is not an absence, but a channel. It lets decisions move like water along carved grooves. Outside the walls, the monastery tends relationships the way it tends gardens. Gleaning rights are announced in gestures at the gate. Villagers may collect what the wind has spared in the orchard after the brethren had finished. First come, first served. No quarrels. A steward's steady presence amidst the trees helps the lions remain lions. On the river, a skiff the brothers have repaired is traded for dried eels when catches are good.
In famine, fish is a choir with a different hymn: protein, salt, resilience. The brothers keep nets mended through winter evenings, knot by knot, because frayed gear is a tax no one can afford. At night, when the bell calls to prayer, the cellarer kneels with the rest and feels the weight of the keys at his side. He does not pray to grow clever. He prays to remain steady. The famine teaches a hard humility, that generosity without foresight burns out, and foresight without generosity calcifies. Between those rocks he steers the house. He will wake before dawn to count again, to listen to grain again, to measure bread again, to send the carts again, until the first green hints at the field's edges, and swallows return to write their calligraphy under the eaves. When that day comes, the ring of keys will feel lighter, but the lessons of ritual, attention, and measured mercy will remain heavy and good.
The almonry door is small on purpose. In famine, openings teach behavior. A broad gate invites a tide, a narrow wicket shapes a line. Here the wood is dense and dark with oil, reinforced by iron straps that clue the hand to be gentle, no banging, no panic. At dawn, a lay brother wipes the iron latch with a cloth dipped in vinegar and water, not as a ceremony, but as simple hygiene, and hangs a shallow bell beneath the eave. When the bell rings once, the line draws near. When it rings twice, mothers with infants step forward. When it rings thrice, the very old and the infirm are guided ahead. No one argues. The rule enters the bones like bread. On a small shelf beside the wicket sit the day's tools. There is a hornbeam measure, rim worn to an honest shine. A ladle with a nick filed at the exact famine mark. A waxed board slate where the brother makes the lightest of notes, initials, village marks, the tiny cross that means housebound, deliver. A pouch of tokens rests at his elbow, little wooden discs, each with a notch pattern corresponding to a household. Yesterday, a disc was given for today's ration. Today, the disc returns and becomes soup and bread. Tokens do what paper cannot in wet weather and what memory should not in a crowd. Keep accounts without shame. No one speaks. The line advances on a choreography of glances, nods, and the soft thud of wooden shoes. Ration rules are inked in practicality rather than sentiment. Bread is issued in portions aligned with the monastery's own refectory measure, a quiet promise that the outside and inside live by the same famine. Where a household brings a vessel, the brother inspects it with a careful eye. Is it clean, free of cracks that harbor danger, large enough to cool safely? A quick rinse from a bucket steeped with ash and hot water spares tomorrow's stomach aches. The pottage itself is modest but watchful. Grains brought to a true boil, simmered long enough to be safe, salted sparingly because the barrels of salt are finite and the road to the coast is mud and rumor. Broad beans are soaked until their husks slip like paper. Cabbage cores, chopped small, give body. A bone is coaxed to give one more whisper of strength. The ladle moves the way a bell rings, steady, impartial, precise. There are exceptions, and they are quiet. The brother looks once at a child's wrists, thin as quills. He adds a spoon. He sees the gray flutter in the cheeks of a feverish grandmother. He ties a bit of linen to the handle of her bowl so the infirmary will know her by the sign when she arrives. He notes with a fleck of chalk on the slate that a family has not come in 2 days. By midday, a novice will be sent with a basket and a question. The rule is a raft, but mercy is the rope that binds it together. Behind the almonry, a second team is awake long before first light, building the day's roots like a loom.
The courtyard smells of cold iron, old hay, and the faint fat of winter grease. Axles are checked. Wedges, short blocks to chalk wheels on descents, are counted and tied with fresh cord. A list of hamlets is laid out on the table, distances scratched in chalk, bridges circled, hills underlined, fords annotated with last week's water depth. One brother knows the topography like a psalm. He, "Take the north lane past the 3 ash trees. The right rut is sound, the left sinks after the thaw." He never raises his voice. The words fall like pebbles placed in a jar, one root per sound. Loads are not simply as much as we can carry. They are planned with a conservatism that survivors understand. A cart must return. A donkey must not be spent in one merciful morning. Ropes lash bread baskets in a lattice that spares the loaves from being bruised into waste. Lidded tubs, wooden, waxed, hold stew meant to be served at the chapel porches and drunk hot, never stored. Seed grain rides only under seal and never on a public route. The brethren know that desperate men dream of taking seed for today. The rule ensures there will be a tomorrow to sow. Fodder logistics are a ledger within the ledger. The animals receive a carefully measured mash of bran and chaff wet with warm water. A carter smooths a mule's ears and murmurs without words. The animal's breath plumes in the lantern glow as if answering. Hooves are picked. A spare pin for the linch is stowed in a pocket where frost cannot bite it brittle. The carter carries a coil of rawhide for emergency repairs, and a bag with a little resin and thread for a wheel's spoke if it complains. Patience, not speed, saves time on bad roads. At the gate, the last decisions are made. Weather is a council member. A flag tied half-mast on the stable beam means the ridge path is icing. A bundle of reeds hung at the gate means wind pushing from the west. Fences may have drifted. Take the valley track. A small plank painted white leans against the inner wall if the river ferry has warped a plank and can carry only light loads. It leans the other way when the ferryman has set it right. No one writes this down. The monastery has learned to talk with wood and cloth because they do not forget in panic. The guards, only brothers in wool, not men with weapons, let the carts through and then bar the gate long enough to break any notion of a scrum. The world will not flood in. It will be served in cups. The almonry continues, a pulse at the wall as the carts become capillaries threading out through lanes that remember medieval feet and Roman wheels, and deer before them. On the road, the route itself is a cupboard. The monastery keeps small caches where prudence allows. A grain jar cellared at a waypoint chapel. A coil of rope hung where a slope has humbled pride. A wooden bucket tucked under a lean-to at a well where the wind grinds chill into hands that need help to draw water. A page in the bursar's ledger pays for these in quiet coin. Small oil to mend the chapel door. A plank to replace a plank. In return, the road becomes less a hazard and more a helper. Distribution at the destination mirrors the almonry's habits. Narrow doors, measured vessels, a bell to prioritize the weak. The visiting brothers borrow the village's familiar faces to keep peace. They do not preach. They lift lids and fill bowls and show by the patience of their hands that tomorrow will look like today, and so panic can loosen its grip. They leave behind a chalk mark near the chapel lintel. A circle with a line through it means we will return in 3 days. 2 lines mean 5. Children keep these calendars better than adults. They count mornings and report to mothers with fervor. Back at the monastery, the pace does not slacken. Vessels are scrubbed with ash and boiled water. The day's tokens are counted back in, missing ones tallied as clues. A family moved on? Sick? Ashamed? A novice with good eyes is sent with a message to the mill. Stone number 2 wobbles when under heavy oat, because a broken stone is a broken week. In the scriptorium, a letter is drafted to the Lord's Reeve about repairing the marsh plankway. A postscript offers spare hands and a few cartloads of brush if the Reeve will provide nails. Logistics in famine is rarely solitary. It is the art of tugging many small strings until the net holds. The rule of ration has its seasons within the famine. Once each 7 days, the almonry issues a handful of vinegar to households to freshen water and rinse vessels. Once each 10, a little oil, if there is any, to polish wood and soothe cracked skin that would otherwise split and sicken. Every 3rd day the infirmary receives a special pot, barley thinned to a silk for those whose bellies have forgotten their job. These cycles are whispered across the monastery in objects rather than speech. Jars moved to the front of a shelf, a ladle hung on a different peg, the bell's rope tied with a knot and then untied. When dusk comes, the almonry door is washed, latched to threshold as if it were an altar. The brother who kept the measure sits for a time with his hands open on his knees, palms faintly pruned from vinegar water. He studies the tokens still in the pouch, the 2 extra ladles given, the name on the slate with a cross beside it that means someone did not wake. He does not weep every night. Mercy would drown him. He folds the cloth, snuffs the lamp, and hangs the bell rope so it will not speak by accident in the wind. In the choir, the prior's voice opens the psalm low and
In famine, grain is not food until it is made safe, chewable, and warm. Between the bin and the bowl stands a small parliament of objects: stones, sieves, peels, paddles, and a ledger of wood. The monastery mills with a water wheel where the stream consented to bend. In deep frost, when the mill race rims with lace and the undershot wheel grows teeth of ice, brothers go out with poles and break winter's glass so the paddles can catch a current again. They do this in silence, sleeves damp, cheeks bitten pink. The miller, cowl thrown back, listens to the wheel as if it were a beast with moods. When its rhythm stutters, he adjusts the sluice gate by inches, never by vigor. Good milling is patience given weight. Inside, the millstones breathe dust in history. The bedstone keeps its counsel while the runner turns above. Dressings are tended by a brother who knows the furrows like a psalm, feathered in herringbone to lift grain and not scorch it with friction. He studies the flour by pinch and let go. Does it cling like damp fog? Too warm? Stones too close? Does it fall like pale snow? Good. Does it feel gritty like a muttered argument? Furrows dull? Time for the bill and hammer. In famine, he admits more bran to the day than the palate loves. The belly will be glad of it, and waste is a luxury of memory. The sieve frames, linen stretched tight, sort grades with names no outsider would use: monks, laymen's, travelers. Honest labels for honest times. A careful sour, wild yeast kept in a clay pot with a cloth cap, anchors the bread. The kitchen brother feeds it like a small pet, thickening it with yesterday's flour and warming it near the gentlest part of the oven's fading heat. In lean weather, the mother must not be shocked. A sudden chill can sulk it silent. A sudden heat can make it sing too loudly and use itself up. He marks the pot with 2 loops of twine. One says, ready for leavening. The other, too young, wait. No one asks. They look and know. The oven is a dome of reliability, a low half-egg of clay and stone that glows with the memory of last week's loaves. Firing it is a geometry. Bundles of faggots, hazel, willow, ash, are counted out by the firewood ledger before dawn, not by armfuls, but by the day's need and tomorrow's promise. The ledger is humble but exacting. Columns for species, how it burns, how it smokes. Length, so it stacks to proof a measure. And moisture, estimated by sound. Does the stick ring or thud when two are tapped? The copist keeps the oven honest. A steward's winter ink schedules fellings in a 7-year rhyme. Famine does not permit panic cutting, because next winter waits patiently for fools. When the dome has drunk its heat, walls white to gray, then the faintest shadow of soot, the fire is raked out and its embers husbanded to start the soup hearth. Ash is sifted. Fine ash goes to scouring pots and sweetening lye for laundry. Coarse ash is saved to be mixed with manure at the middens, where warmth breeds spring's hope. The oven floor is wiped with a damp broom of willow. The hiss is a song that tells the peel when to move. Loaves, shaped tight to hold what strength flour has, are slid in with a motion learned over winters. Forward, plant, twist, draw. No chatter, only the scratch of wood on stone and the soft thud of dough settling to attention. Bread in famine is shorter on romance but longer on thought. Barley and rye carry the day. Peas and beans ground fine lend protein and a ghost of sweetness when toasted gently before milling. Salt is measured by a pinch stick carved with notches. One notch for the monastery's table, one for the almonry batch. And when the stick grows smooth with use, the bursar kisses it like a relic, because it has kept them from accident. The crust is thick, not for pride, but for storage. A good crust makes a good week. Loaves cool on slatted racks where air can pass and mice cannot jump the distance. A brother walks the racks like a monk walking beads, tapping each loaf with a knuckle. Does it answer hollow, baked through, or does it sigh, back for a moment to the cooling mouth of the oven? He does not guess, wasting. They do not guess, guessing wastes. Not all flour sees the wheel. When the stream sulks or the wheel must rest, hand querns come down from their shelf. 2 stones, a grain at a time, a shoulder circle that writes the same sentence until the bowl is a small hill. Novices learn the honest fatigue of hunger's arithmetic. 3 turns for a mouthful, 300 for a pot. The sound is intimate, stone whispering into stone, a rasp that makes conversation unnecessary. They add nothing to the flour except attention. Fuel is the second grain, kitchens counted. The great hearth gives way to smaller, lidded braziers that nurse a charcoal glow and spend heat as if it were coin. Simmer, not boil. Steep, not rage. Stew is managed by time tricks, pots nested, lids weighted with clean stones to hold a gentle pressure without veracity. The smoke house earns its keep with very little flame and a lot of nerve. Fish hung in winter fog absorb breath more than fire. A handful of juniper trimmings sends hope into preservation, and juniper's thrift is praised in the ledger with a small star. The mills told in ordinary years would be a handful kept by the house for the service. In famine, the toll is a different sort of keeping. The monastery reduces or forgives it for neighbors and writes those remissions into the woodpile. More bundles must be cut, more oven days planned, because generosity does not bake itself. Letters go out with the seal pressed careful as a loaf score, asking the Lord to remit rents and the reeve to spare men for the coppice days. The scriptorium's quiet is broken only by the stamp of the seal and the dryer's crackle as the wax cools. Bread leaves in 2 directions, to the refectory and to the world. To the refectory, a bell marks the measure. Bowls on the left for those who labored at wheel and wood. Bowls on the right for those whose work left them sitting but thinking. There is no extra bread for talking. For the world, loaves are marked with a cross that is less piety than instruction. Cut here, equal quarters, no wedge of favoritism.
At the almonry, knives follow the cross without debate. A child learns to match blade to score. A mother learns to hold her palm under the cut so crumbs do not scatter into waste. The monastery teaches not with words, but with the shape of the loaf. Failures are recorded without shame. A batch that soured too hard, a day when the millstone is scorched and smelled of sorrow, a cord of oak that proved wetter than it swore and smoked the oven black. Each error earns a line in the margin of the ledger and a remedy. Open the sluice earlier on frosty mornings. Test the oak by split and tap, not by trusting the outside silver. Keep the mother closer to the oven's flank in the hour after firing, then move her away lest she leap. In famine, the difference between pride and prudence is a winter. Towards night, the oven's spent warmth is used for small mercies, drying laundry in the infirmary, crisping stale crusts into crumbs for thickening tomorrow's brew, and warming stones that will be wrapped in cloth and slipped at the feet of the oldest brothers. The firewood ledger closes with a charcoal nub. The mill door is barred not against theft, but against the foolishness of fatigue returning to try one more sack in the dark. The sour sleeps under its cloth. The peel rests like a placid oar. Grain has become bread. Wood has become heat. Attention has become safety. In the choir, the breath of the community rises white into candlelight and dissolves, proof, in its quiet way, that the day fed them.
The infirmary is the monastery's softest engine. In famine, it hums on breath and broth instead of iron and water wheels. Its door faces east to take the day's gentlest light. Its windows are high and latticed to keep drafts from kneeling beds. Floors are scrubbed with lye made from sifted ash and rainwater. A thin scent of wood smoke and vinegar lives in the timber, clean without bravado. Here, logistics becomes tenderness measured in spoonfuls and minutes. Here, the rule translates into pulse, warmth, and rest. A wooden board by the entrance carries only humble marks, lines for hours, dots for patients not to be roused, a small triangle for those permitted a mouthful in the night. The healer, no grand title, merely sister or brother of the infirmary, keeps time by the chapel bell and by the curve of steam from a pot. They have learned the famine's arithmetic. A starving body must be fed like a fire coaxed from coals. First barley water, pale and patient. Then a gruel thinned with the broth of chicken bones or eel skins, salted shyly. Later, a softened bread drank like a soup. The ladle knows a sequence. 1 sip, 5 breaths, another. Never until fullness, always until safety. Those who have tried to jump the staircase have learned it vanishes underfoot. In the infirmary, food is introduced as if teaching someone to read again, letter by letter, sound by sound, until the page no longer swims. Cups are counted like relics. Each has a notch to mark the first day measure, a second notch for second day, and so on to the 7th, when a body may greet ordinary portions. A string of tiny wooden beads hangs at each bed. A bead slips down the cord with each spoonful taken and kept. At the hour, the healer fingers the beads and knows without speech if a belly managed its lesson. Not everything is swallowed. Not everything stays. The logbook does not scold. It writes, Brother Matthias, 3 beads, held. Widow Annika, 2 beads, rested. 1 returned, soothed. The words are sparse and kind. Heat is rationed with the same thoughtfulness as bread. Stones warmed in the bakehouse's spent oven sleep wrapped in linen at the foot of a bed. Woolen caps keep the night air from tugging at worn bodies. The infirmary hearth wastes nothing. 2 hooks and a crane hang pots at different heights so stews can simmer and barley can merely steep. When smoke is sulky, a handful of aromatic trimmings, juniper, bay from the kitchen garland,
coax the air to move without bragging. Blankets are rotated like old soldiers. The outermost sleeps nearest the fire until it has shrugged off damp. Then, folded with its warm heart inside, it relieves another. Cleanliness is a work party. Basins are set on a long bench near a south window where winter sun finds them. Cloths hang on a pegboard with small wooden tokens identifying their owner by symbol rather than name, a sprig, a star, a fish, so dignity does not fray. Water is warmed in batches and tempered with vinegar for wiping hands, faces, and bowls. The rushes underfoot are new each moon. Spent rushes become part of the midden's quiet chemical, turning rot into spring. Chamber pots are marked with a slash of red paint for those with fevers. Novices learn the discipline of carrying and scouring with ash until the ceramic rings sweet again. Herbs are not magic. They are memory. In famine, the apothecary's chest looks like a winter garden carried indoors. Fennel for stomachs that complain of their new work. Mint when breath grows sour. A little thyme for courage in the chest. A rub of marigold on cracked lips if oil grows thin. A jar of honey, if any, has a folded strip of parchment under its lid bearing a single word, for wounds. It is not eaten. Poppy sleeps in the locked cupboard and is asked for by the prior's key only when mercy demands forgetfulness. Vinegar are for thieves. Garlic, rue, rosemary, sage, steeped long, is painted with a feather along the doorposts and bed rails when coughs travel. Whether it cleanses air or simply cleanses worry hardly matters, if hands grow more careful after the feather's touch. The infirmary's diet larder is its own ledger. Chickens are kept through the winter not for meat, but for eggs. Shells are dried and crumbled into broth for the feeblest, a snow of calcium on warm barley. The fish pond's elders, carp grown heavy and wise, are not harvested unless the ledger and the prior's face agree. Instead, small eels and winter-biting roach become the day's kindness, bones simmered to translucence, and then pressed through cloth until even a toothless mouth can welcome strength. Salt is a stern steward. It is measured with a small ivory spoon that lives on a nail, and when the spoon goes missing, work stops until it returns. Too much salt burdens a heart already anxious. Too little steals the spark of nerve and muscle. The metal line is love with a ruler. Contagion is shepherded with calm. The infirmary has a narrow room with its own door to the orchard. There coughs are tended where air can wander. A square of white cloth hung on a peg outside means enter with vinegar cloth at the mouth. A square of blue means only the healer enters. A square of bear peg means come and bring broth. When weather allows, beds are shifted near the latticed windows for a short draft. When weather denies, the rope to the bell is knotted a certain way so the kitchen knows to boil an extra pot for steam. These signals practice mercy on both sides of the wall. The sick are honored by plain rules that keep neighbors unafraid. The well are freed from guessing or worry. Night nourishment is a separate route entirely. A novice moves through the dark with a shuttered lamp and a tray, feet memorizing the map between beds, beads, and bowls. He does not wake the strong. He does not skip the faint. He rests each cup into each hand and waits until the warmth comes back through the wood into his fingers. If breath is ragged, he counts with it, quiet as snow. When the tray is empty, he visits the little brazier near the door and rewarms the stones, then checks the pegs of cloths. A line sagging means a cloth used. The sagging line becomes his shopping list for laundry at dawn. Rehabilitation is logistics disguised as gentleness. On the third day, if the beads and the logbook agree, the patient receives a walking stone, a smooth river rock, warm, cradled in the hand, to carry for the length of the cloister once, then twice, then 4 times by week end. The weight is trivial to the well and holy to the weak. It focuses the mind on steady steps rather than the terrifying breadth of recovery. On the 5th day, if strength returns, a thin slice of yesterday's bread is toasted near the coals until it can be rubbed with a clove of garlic and kissed with a film of oil. The scent reaches a place hunger had made mute. On the 7th, a seat at vespers, close to the aisle so rising and kneeling are both possible and optional. Records bind the infirmary to the granary and the bakehouse. Each midday, the healer sends a wooden tally to the cellarer, a notched stick that says 4 on first measure, 3 on second, 1 can take broth thickened. In return, a small basket arrives with the loaves best suited to mending, yesterday's, cooler, easier to digest, crusts softened with warm water. The kitchen sends a jug of small ale made smaller still, and barley water by the stoneware gallon, sealed with wax if it must travel to a cottage where the bedridden wait. The infirmary dispatches in turn a note about who should not be asked to bring in wood or mend a fence yet, and who may sit for an hour at the quern to feel useful without harm. Death is not a failed plan here. It is a neighbor with a chair kept ready. When it sits, the infirmary's order does not break. A cloth is laid over the face, oil touches the brow, the bed is emptied and washed with lye and a splash of the vinegar steep. The beads are slid back to the top of their string, and the string is hung, clean, for another hand. The logbook closes on the entry with a small cross and a single word, released. The room is aired, while the bell tells the house what it already knows, that a candle has gone out, and the wind did not enter to do it. The infirmary gives back to the monastery in small, steady gifts, men and women who can stand, hands that can lift, eyes that can read by candlelight without wavering. It also lends a discipline that the whole house borrows. Do not rush what must be gradual. Do not neglect what must be constant. Measure mercy as faithfully as grain. When the famine slackens one day, when fields show color that tastes like a promise, the infirmary will still keep its beads, its notched cups, its vinegar, its warm stones, because the body has other hungers than bread, and order is food as surely as soup. At Compline, the healer stands in the back, palms open to the dark.
The famine leans hardest against the door of spring. Winter can be endured by shrinking rations, by the hearth's discipline, by the patience of habit. But spring demands an extravagance of faith, to bury good food in the ground and call it seed. In the monastery, the seed loft is the quietest chapel, and its liturgy is caution. The door is barred by 2 keys, one on the cellarer's ring, one on the prior's cord. They meet at dawn with no flourish, set their hands to iron, and open to the smell of husk and last summer. Inside, sacks are not sacks, but months, knotted shut with cord that remembers the day it was tied. The brothers lift them as if they held sleep itself. Seed is chosen with a care that feels like prayer. In a shallow tub, a brine trial sorts the frivolous from the heavy-hearted. Clear water will do if salt is dear, but a pinch of salt speaks more quickly. Kernels that float are set aside for beasts or birds. Kernels that sink are good enough to be called the future. A handful is held to the ear and shaken like beads. The sound tells whether dryness has been honest. The cellarer cracks a few brains with a knife, tests the milky heart between finger and thumb, and nods without words. He counts neither acres nor promises. He counts baskets of viable seed against the shortest calendar that will still nourish a harvest. Not all seed remains within the walls. The monastery keeps a small book of seed loans, a ledger of hope checked in and checked out on trust. The bursar writes the borrower's mark and the measure drawn, a peck, a bushel, and leaves a second column blank for autumn. The column is not a threat. It is a place laid at the table for a guest who will arrive when the fields have told their answer. A third again, the entry whispers,
repayment in kind, with a little more so the seed chest grows fat again against another lean year. If the borrower fails, a cross stands where the measure should be, and next year the almonry's duty thickens to meet the loss. Mercy and arithmetic keep house together. Fields are visited like patients. Before the plow moves, a brother walks the furrows with a staff and a small spade. He presses the soil and listens to the way it breaks. In the hollows where winter hoarded water, the ground holds the print of his heel as if jealous. Those places will be last. On the ridges where frost heave has lifted and dried, a darker crumble tells him the earth will accept a blade and not cling to it like a drowning man. He pinches a bit and smells it, sour, sweet, inert. A scatter of ash from the winter's hearths will sweeten where rot has brooded too long. A cart or two of pond mud, dredged when ice was honest, will give body to a corner of sand that forgets water too quickly. The plow team is not muscle alone. It is logistics with hooves. Oxen have been rationed all winter on mash and hay, measured with the patience ordinarily saved for bread. Their yokes are checked for chafe, leather softened with the last of a small pot of tallow. Each hoof is picked. If iron shoes are within grace this year, each nail is pressed like a promise. The plow's share and coulter are inspected, edges dressed with the file until they shine without vanity. A spare pin, a spare strap, a loop of rawhide, these hang from the plow pole like charms against folly. A novice walks ahead with a forked stick to lift the first stubborn root. He is learning that speed, like anger, wastes the hour. When the share bites, the field sighs. Ridge and furrow from older years guides the water like ribs that know where breath should go. The first stretch is not straight. It remembers stones and stories. The carter speaks to the oxen in vowels more than words. Behind, a brother carries a bucket with seed and a cow that shadows his eyes from the mischief of wind. There is no sower's drill, only his measured arm, a practiced semicircle that writes grain into air and lets it fall like small rain. He has a string tied from his belt to his elbow to keep the swing honest. In famine, even the arc of the hand is rationed. Sowing has its calendar within the calendar. The monastery marks saints' days less as holy coincidence than as weather memory. If larks sing at prime on the day of Benedict, broadcast barley without fear. If the wood smoke falls flat on the feast of Joseph, wait 2 days for warmth to lift it, lest the seed sulk. A lantern hung on the west gate at dusk means frost likely. Cover the seed barley with a harrow pass before complying. The language is brief because it must run the whole house without snagging. In the orchard, willow switches, last year's prunings, are stuck at the margin of a newly sown strip, a pale fence to remind boots not to wander and to teach the rook that the land is watched. The monastery shares boundaries as it shares bread. Gleaning rites are set in order before the first seed is thrown. At the gate, a board is chalked, small arms and old hands to glean after first mowing, no scythes, baskets, not sacks, no quarrels. Where the monastery's fields meet a neighbor's, the hedge is repaired together. Stakes driven in rhythm, brush woven in silence, a ditch cleaned so that spring water knows which way to run. A hedge is more than a boundary, is a wind moderator, a bird keeper, an herb nursery. In famine, hedges grow as carefully as loaves. Too open, and seed becomes bird song. Too tight, and air stales, and mildew takes the green's courage. Seed in the ground is not yet spared from arithmetic. The sower's measure is a chant. So many handfuls per pace, so many paces per ridge. A small slate hangs from his belt. If wind gusts, he marks a line, tightens the cast for the next length, and returns at day's end to stitch a little on the lee side. Where slope threatens wash, he lays straw lightly over the strip at dusk, pins with forked twigs, and removes it in the morning when the sun has taught the frost to be kind. Rooks are argued with politely.
lines of white string tied to willow pegs, a boy with a rattle, a shifting shape of cloth that suggests hawk to a black glance. No shouting is needed. The birds respect consistency more than drama. Back at the loft, the seed ledger loses sleep with the brothers. Each basket carried to the field becomes a subtraction that the refectory will taste. Ale remains small, bread remains brown and patient, pottage stretches with cabbage ribs and peas ground fine. The infirmary sends a message. 3 on second measure may take a little yoke. Do not come asking them for corn work yet. The workmaster replies with a token tied to the note, a small carved eel. Tomorrow the pond will be set with lines. With luck, a broth will come home to carry strength into thin cheeks. These exchanges drag no authority behind them. They hum like bees in a cold spring, encouragements that keep the hive from dozing. The monastery's roads learn spring too. Carts that carried bread out now return with muck for the fields. Middens churned, ash sifted, pondweed piled until it sweetens. On the plankway through the marsh, a gap is bridged with a board bearing the reef's mark. The monastery sent 3 men and nails, the village sent axes and laughter, and the result is a crossing that will not pitch a cart into lament. A stone culvert under the lane is cleared. The novice learns the smell of winter trapped and the satisfaction of water going where it ought to go. In famine, repair is a crop. It yields time. A corner of the cloister becomes a seed school. On a bench, a shallow tray of damp cloth cradles a sample from each sack, 10 grains set in a line. After 2, then 3 days, the tally shows how many woke and stretched a thread of life. The numbers fold into the sowing plan. A sack that germinates poorly is saved for feed or ground for the kitchen's careful stretching of today. The prior looks at the tray with the same affection he turns on poulter and lamp. Tiny signals telling a house when to hope and when to hold. Not all hope is planted in barley. In the kitchen garden, cold frames patched with horn or pale oiled linen trap a little sun against the soil. Cold seedlings nurged at knitted caps, onion sets, small and earnest, promise sweetness in months that cannot imagine sweetness yet. Mint, that pessimist's friend, shows it green rumor along the wall where the bakehouse shares its afterheat with roots struggling to remember the taste of spring. The gardener measures out ash around each frame's feet like a charm against slugs. He knows every thief by name, but will not say them aloud. There are temptations the rule must answer. A traveler, lean and friendly with praise, offers to swap a clever seed thrower for a measure of grain. The birds smiles and closes the ledger. The monastery has seen cleverness eat more years than it saved. A rumor reaches the gate that a lord to the east is buying seed at double measure with silver minced in far towns. The prower tightens his mouth and sends a letter carried under seal. We will give you bread by the cart if you are hungry now, but we will not sell you next autumn. He does not expect thanks. He expects the letter to be remembered when wisdom returns. At dusk, the fields look as they looked yesterday in
The scriptorium looks like a place for quiet beauty. Lamp glow on vellum, black ink steady as breath. But in famine, it is also the monastery's exchange, market, and court. The room keeps a northern light so shadows do not bully the hand. Windows wear oiled linen to tame drafts. A brazier hums low, enough to warm ink, but not enough to wake sleep from the vellum. Quills, trimmed with the patience one usually spends on bread, stand in a small clay cup. Penknives shine without swagger. On the long table, beside psalters and homilies, lie letters that are more urgent than any sermon, requests for remittance, tallies of seed loans, lists of cart repairs owed, promises offered in a neat hand that means what it writes. Wax is the scriptorium's small fire. Cakes of it, plain for drafts, colored for formal, sleep in a wooden box with compartments labeled by habit more than words. A brass spoon and a rushlight are the alchemy. When the letter's ink has dried and the sand brushed off, wax is warmed until it blushes, but does not boil. The prior presses the seal with weight measured by years, not by muscle. In the matrix is carved the monastery's clear identity, cross and sheath, river and wheel. So those who break the wax will feel under their thumb the shape of a house that keeps its word. The seal is not a shout, it is a handshake that can travel. The language of famine correspondence is plain and exact. To the reeve, we ask that the tithe be taken in measure after harvest, not in seed before it. We'll send 2 men to mend the plankway. We ask in return 5 dozen nails and leave to take brush from the east hedge. To the Millers' Guild in the next town, stone number 2 has warmed beyond comfort. We request a dressing by your man with the iron bill. In return, the house will take your journeyman to table and board for 7 days and forgive 2 tolls. To the river ferryman, the left plank has cupped. We will provide a board. We ask you to carry our carts at the same price you charged in the year of poor hay. Now and then a letter to a lord. Your tenants are hungry. We will keep their bellies steady through the leanest weeks if you remit rent on fields striped 6 and 7. We will show you the ledger when the harvest stands. None of this is poetry. It is bread written in ink. Couriers are chosen with the same care as words. A brother with good legs and an honest face takes the leather satchel. Inside, each letter is wrapped in oiled cloth against weather and folly. He wears no finery, only a waist coin for ferries and a small tally stick for expenses that will be carved rather than spoken. Around his neck hangs a token the size of a walnut, wax set in wood bearing the monastery's seal, so that when doubt squints from a stranger's doorway, the token can argue for him without raising his voice. He knows which cottages will trade a bowl of stew for news of a cousin, which dogs are all teeth and no intention, which lanes go from firm to soup after noon sun loosens the frost. At dusk he folds himself into a chapel halfway and sleeps on the boards, letters tucked under his breast like a second heart. On the return, the scriptorium practices the art of reading answers that are not written. A lord writes back with gracious words and a seal heavy as a coin, but his clerk's hand has hurried the date and smudged the witness's marks. The bursar murmurs that the promise is soft. Plan for half. The reeve answers with a short I and a precise tally of nails. This is strong wood to build with. The millers say their journeyman is ill and send a bill for the dressing before the work. A quiet no is penned, and with it an offer of a bed and a place to eat if their master will come himself. In famine, diplomacy means to keep the conversation alive without letting hunger steal the grammar. Promises are stored like tools. On a high shelf sit small bundles of counters, hazel twigs with their buds still drowsy, tied in 7s and 20s to mark deliveries owed or due. A bundle marked reeve nails hangs from a peg until the cart returns with its steel clatter. Then the twigs are untied and fed to the brazier, smoke rising like a receipt. A small chest holds tokens that stand for future debt forgiven, the copper fish for the ferryman, the wooden scallop for a pilgrim hostel that agreed to feed our carter last week. These are the monastery's second currency, trust that can be spent later without shame. The guest house sits next to the scriptorium in both map and purpose. Hospitality is law, but in famine it needs a ruler. The guest table is set with the same bread as the refectory. An extra ladle is asked for with a look toward the almonry and given or refused with the slightest tilt of the head.
Pilgrims with letters of passage are received. Travelers with clever stories are given a place on the floor and a bowl, but not the keys to conversation. When a messenger from the Lord arrives, his horse is rubbed down with fair hay. The stable boy's hands learn a truth the envoy's words may hide. The bursar watches this and files the information beside the seal impressions in his mind's cabinet. The monastery has a map, though it looks nothing like a modern one. It is a table, dotted with objects. The ferryman is a carved fish, the miller's guild a little stone with furrows scratched, the reeve a square of iron nail, the Lord's manor a bit of red wax. Lines of string, pulled taut or left slack, show roads that hold or falter, men who keep their word with care or with haste. When a string grows slack, plans change. Bread go by the ridge track instead of the valley. The seed loan is offered to a hamlet that sent back the last one in fair time. A letter of thanks travels first because gratitude is a bridge that does not rot. Debt and penance live in this room too. Not the debt of coin only, but of fairness. The scriptorium keeps a thin book bound in dull leather where there are no numbers, only names and the words, "We were late," "We were short," "We were wrong." When a cart failed a promise by a day, when a ladle leaned too light at the almonry wicket, when a stranger was turned away too sharply at dusk, the entry is made. On a day in spring when field work pauses for rain, the prior opens this book and reads a few lines aloud in chapter. Then he assigns amends, an extra cart to the hamlet where we were late, an extra ladle for a week, measured fairly, to the line at the wicket, a candle to the guest house, so the next stranger's face is seen more kindly. Penance keeps the channels from silt. Some letters do not ask, they warn. A monastery to the north writes that wild men have begun to waylay carts near the old quarry. The scriptorium's reply is a timetable. Our carts will not pass the quarry this month. We will send seed to you by the ridge path. If you can meet at the oak with 3 men, bring your seals. No swords are mentioned, no shame. Arrangements are the armor. Another house writes that a sickness that coughs like sawdust has entered their dormitory. The infirmary answers with the vinegar receipt and the cloth signals for the peg, and adds, "Keep your chant. The breath in prayer keeps the ribs honest." The rule reaches even into ink. No letter is sent promising what the granary cannot give or what the oven cannot bake. No flatteries are written for the lords, because compliments are a kind of debt the monastery cannot afford to pay with lies. The prior's marginal notes are sparing and sharp. If he refuses, offer the pondweed for his cattle. He will say yes if we mention the bridge he has not repaired. Do not let our novice carry both letters and rumors, one at a time. The quill scratches, the world's edges move a little. The famine is negotiated into something livable. At day's end, the scriptorium tidies itself like a kitchen. Quills are rinsed and left to dry, knives wrapped, inkstones wiped and turned so tomorrow's hand will find them calm. Seals are warmed once more and then laid to rest, each in its felt pocket, as if tucking away small ambassadors who have done their day. The rushlight is pinched, the window linen is straightened against the star-cold night. In the corridor outside, the sound of the courtyard is a different kind of writing. Wheel on stone, rope on wood, a donkey's snort. The letters will meet those sounds in the morning. Promises will find wheels.
In a famine year, bread is loud and water is quiet, yet the monastery is kept alive by what makes no sound when poured with care. Food can be stretched, but thirst will not negotiate. Illness can be soothed, but filth is a creditor with harsh terms. The monastery's waterworks are humble and exacting. Buckets, benches, broom heads, and a schedule that walks the corridors like a second bell. If logistics is the art of moving the necessary to where it is needed in the moment it will be useful, then water is logistics' first pupil and last instructor. The well in the inner court has been coaxed for generations. Its coping is smooth with hands, its rope grooved where winter and wrists have found the same path year after year. The windlass was built by a brother who believed in quiet gears, elm teeth pegged into an oak drum, greased with tallow until their whisper is almost a prayer. In frost, a felt-wrap bucket is lowered so the iron hoop does not kiss the stone rim and scribe a chill into the water. The bucket's lip wears a tiny brass bead, a compromise between purity and speed, so that when it climbs, it does not dribble onto the stone where ice might lay a small, treacherous trap. The rope is counted, not measured. 3 wraps makes kitchen measure, 2 for the infirmary, 4 for the laundry troughs. Each wrap is a ration that does not need arguing. Rain is a second well, and the roofs are its monks. The lead gutters, old, patched with care and conscience, tilt toward barrels at the cloister corners. In Famine, there's no shame in making soap thin and barley water thinner, but there is pride in keeping the rain clean as it falls. The roofer's broom goes up after every gusty night. Moss is scraped tenderly, leaves lifted, bird lime scoured. A gauze of horsehair is stretched where downspouts meet barrels. It catches the floating world before it becomes someone's drink. The first minute of rain is cast aside into the herb border, the dirty minute that knows dust and chimney talk, and then the barrel receives the honest sky. A wooden paddle marked with notches lives in each barrel. It is dipped each morning and evening, and the steward writes the height in a narrow column that cares nothing for poetry. East barrel, 5 notches, west, 6, and a whisper. Water has a rotor, and the rotor has a bell. At prime, the kitchen draws first. 1 cart of buckets to set the day's simmer, a second to wash the knives and boards with ash and heat, a third to cool the sour in summer when its temper grows theatrical. The infirmary follows next, its buckets lined with cloth dipped in vinegar so that the water will remember to be kind. Laundry receives its portion next, not for closing, those hours fall elsewhere, but for the cloths and cups that are the infirmary's alphabet. At terce, the guest house draws because hospitality without clean water is theater. At 6th, the scriptorium receives a jug and a wink. Ink and dust and patience are a thirsty trinity. Vespers gifts the night with buckets to top the cistern, so dawn will not begin with scraping the bottom of any barrel. The monastery keeps a cistern beneath the refectory, a cool belly that holds the house's confidence. Its ceiling is a shallow barrel vault, brick rubbed tight and smeared with a lime wash that glows like moon fat in lamplight. A narrow hatch allows inspection. The brother with the best knees descends the steps with a lantern, shielded so soot will not lie to the walls. He listens before he looks. The echo tells him if the water is restless under visitors or if a leak has written a secret elsewhere. When a fortnight has passed and the cistern shows the faint film the world leaves on all things, the house sits to with a discipline as old as ships. Drain a third, scrub with brooms a new heather, rinse with vinegar and a pinch of salt, drain again, feel. The vinegar lingers, a thin frown in the nose, and no one minds because they know what it means. Carefulness wander round. Latrines and drains are the other half of water's work, and in famine they move as carefully as laws. The latrines perch where they can be honestly aired, a long bench over a trench boxed with stone and lined with clay with a bland view of sky so men will not linger to gossip. A stack of cut brush sit near at hand, not for privacy, for the rule provides that, but for covering and keeping the stink from walking. Twice each week, the trench receives a shovel's worth of sifted ash. It quiets what would rise, dries what would splash, and turns an enemy into someone we can live with. When the trench grows near its season's end, the work party arrives with boards, hooks, and a plan rehearsed to the heartbeat. Move the bench, lay new boards, dig a new trench, fill the old with earth and a memory, plant a line of willows who love what we cannot. A year and a winter will teach that earth to be friendly again. The herb garden will discover it in the third spring and call it generosity. Gray water knows its roots. Soap is a winter luxury as measured as oil. The monastery's lye is made this year strong but clear, brewed from ash and snowmelt in a barrel with a spigot near the bottom. The laundress tests it on a feather. If the feather crumples, the lye will. She cools it with more water until the feather nods and returns to its business. Clothes are not scoured until the threads forget who they are. They are coaxed. After rinsing, the gray water runs along a small stone channel, past a sieve of twigs and through a bed of Russian mint that will eat the last of the lye and demand no compliments. From there, it feeds a corner of the kitchen garden devoted to plants who like their soil clean but not dainty. Cabbage, leeks, a patch of good-hearted kale. Nothing intended for the infirmary's first cups grows in the line of soap. The gardener keeps charts in his head and the head in his hat. The brewery, thin to small and smaller, is as careful with water as it is with barley. The mash chun staves swell to honesty only when water is warm and time is patient. Another sits with his hand on the stave and tells the brewer when the seeping stops. Wort is cooled in shallow trays in a room that is part chapel, part barn, wide, clean, with shutters that open to a lattice so breathers may speak, but flies may not. The brewer reads the air with a face like he's reading a psalm. Is it too swift, too still, too jealous of its own scent? A bucket of water is set by the door to wet the rushes if the dust rises. Dust is the mother of all flavors, and all flavors are the father of waste. And waste is excommunicated until the harvest is safe. The kitchen's water is guarded from confusion by a ritual that looks like tidiness. 3 basins stand on a board with notches for their feet so they do not wander. The first for scouring, ash and heat. The second for rinsing, plain and hot. The third for cooling, plain and cool. A ladle tied with red cord belongs to the scouring basin and will have its cord cut if it is ever seen elsewhere. This is not superstition, it is memory dressed as rope. The refectory's cups are not dipped but poured. A jug sits on a high stand, its spout shaped to talk in a narrow stream. The stream lands in each cup like a practiced bow. The hand that holds the jug is chosen for wrists that do not tremble even at the end of a long day. When ice lays its quiet rule across the yard, water becomes a walking chore. The well's rope stiffens. A brother warms it with his breath as if comforting a child before it is asked to work. The laundry troughs are covered with shutters made from old doors patched and tight. Inside the covered walkway, a row of clay jars are kept half full against the freeze. A jar half full survives frost that would crack a full one, and famine has no interest in replacing what breaks. In the worst week, buckets are carried from the ale house where boil and ferment keep water flexible. The infirmary's cups never lack. Snow is not water until it has boiled and bowed to a rule. Even children know that mouth-hungry bodies cannot afford the mischief that winter can hide in beauty. Pest control is water's quiet cousin. Rats are argued with by architecture and appetite, not with war. The granary sits high. The mushroom-headed stattle stones do their old wise work. Water trapped in small pitchers along the granary's base makes a moat for those who leap without thinking. Cats are fed just enough to hunt from pride rather than desperation. Traps are set where a rat would brag to a shadow. Those traps are checked at the same hour every day, so surprise never loses its teeth. All these acts are written into the water rota because rot and thirst are neighbors. Where one is, the other will write his name soon. Silence aids the water rounds the way it aids rationing. No one needs to be told to step aside for a bucket. A bucket simply teaches a corridor to straighten. The bell for prime has a small cousin, a soft thunk with a wooden clapper against the well post. It calls the bucket carriers to change ships, reminds the laundry to stop so the scriptorium can draw without frost in the ink, tells the brewery to open the shutters and close them again. In noise, water would be shouted over. In quiet, it moves like a sentence finished in a mind before it finds a mouth. The house writes its water knowledge into objects for those who will come after. A notch on the windlass, do not pull past here or the bucket will slap, saves wrist and temper. A circle of charcoal drawn on the cistern wall at winter's start shows by April how honest the sky has been. A second circle is drawn if hope needs to be taught humility. The launderer ties a blue thread to the handle of the ladle used to rinse water on cloths that cannot be submerged. Wool for the brothers' winter habits, linen for the infirmary's arm slings. The blue thread is replaced each Advent, like an oath renewed. Outside the wall, a small lead has been taught to lend its shoulder, a shallow channel cut with shovels hammered fan and hammered again. It draws water from the stream where it would otherwise dawdle, and brings it past a meal that can be woken on the day when grain cannot be trusted to wait. The lead has 3 wooden gates. One is a laugh, one a sigh, one is a...
In a famine year, the monastery's strength is not only measured in bushels and loaves, but in how gently and exactly it moves them. Grain that shatters is grain that vanishes. Broth that sloshes becomes a story instead of a supper. Between store and mouth lies the modest technology of carrying. Ropes, baskets, barrels, sacks, pegs, and the hands that have learned to ask weight to behave. If bread is a noun, then lashing, hooping, weaving, and lifting are the grammar that lets the house speak mercy in complete sentences. Rope is not born from rope. It is coaxed from plants in time. In late summer past, when the famine had not yet cleared its throat, plots of hemp and flax were set aside with a gratitude that now seems prophetic. Hemp grew tall, flax grew modest. Both learned the monastery's patience. After harvest came retting, the stalks laid in shallow water until the pith and fiber agreed to part. The smell was hard, the brothers nodded and carried on. Now, in winter's long pockets, fiber becomes cord in the rope walk, a straight lane under the eaves where a crank turns and a simple wooden traveler slides along, twisting strands into lays and lays into rope. The rope walk is a music without melody. Creak, tread, breathe, twist. A child could follow it. An ox would understand it. Knots are taught like psalms. The square knot for honesty, the bowline for security, the clove hitch for readiness. Each knot has a story about a saved barrel, a rescued cart, a day not lost to foolishness. Baskets are the monastery's lungs. They breathe weight in and out all day, without complaint, without splinters in the loaf. Willow from the water's edge is cut in the right moon and sorted by mood, green for bend, brown for strength, peeled for lidded work, unpeeled for rough chores. The basket maker's bench is a congregation of humble tools, a bodkin to open a path, a knife kept serious, and a simple gauge stick to keep the rim true. A measure basket lives beside the door. Its depth and breadth agree with the almonry's ladle and the granary's scoop, so arguments cannot find purchase. For travel, lids are woven snug to keep sparrows and children's fingers from learning temptation. For soup, a wicker cradle holds lidded cobs steady so their heat doesn't scald the lap. The basket maker weaves while listening to the mill's faint song through the open door. His hands make patterns, the way chant makes courage. Sacks and their conversation with grain are older than walls. Coarse weave for strength, close weave for pea meal, leather reinforced corners for sacks that will be asked to stand on stone. Cords dyed at one end with onion skin to mark the top. These are the monastery's household words. A slate hangs where sacks are stacked. A mark shows empty, full, reserved, or seed. Old sacks are not thrown. They are turned inside out and their seams re-whipped with waxen thread. A square cut from a tired sack becomes a patch on a better one, or a cloth to lay under the scales so falling grain has a soft place to land. The cellarer's favorite sound is not the bell. It is the susurrus of grain sliding into a sack that will not betray it. Barrels are the geometry applied to thirst and travel. The cooper's shop smells of oak and iron and the small miracles of steam. Staves stand ready like choirmen waiting their note, shaved to a curve that remembers a circle before it exists. Hoops, first hazel, then iron, bind idea to usefulness.
In famine, barrels are more than storage. They are discipline, tight enough that a leak would be a scandal, small enough to be carried by two without breaking backs, broad-shouldered enough to sit without sulking in a cart. The carter taps a stave with a knuckle and hears if the wood has kept the promise it made while drying. He never hurries a hoop. He does not trust a barrel that was frightened into being. Every cask is chalked with its vocation. W for water, A for ale, B for brine, and X for vinegar. Cross letters mean do not confuse. The infirmary's vinegar barrel bears a second mark, a little comb, so that even in Russian lamplight, the right sour finds the right cup. Lashing is literature for objects. Ropes cross the angles taught by weather. Baskets anchored at cart rails through slits that were cut on purpose. Wedges are placed not where they look brave, but where they will be useful when a wheel thinks about arguing with a hill. The carter uses a Spanish windlass to take up the last quiet slack in the load. A short stick between two cords, rotated till the cords hum, tied off so the stick rests like a prayer answered. A long pole, called a shoulder, lives near the cart gate. Two brothers take its ends to move a barrel together with dignity, instead of gossiping with strained backs for a week. On ice, a sledge borrowed from woodcutting glides under baskets and barrels alike. The rope becomes a rein, and the world remembers that friction is a tax one can sometimes negotiate down. Standard measures prevent quarrels and waste. The monastery keeps a family of nested tubs for grain and a set of nesting jugs for liquids. Each bears a small unique scar on the rim, filed faithfully on the day they were certified against the parish's master measure, so a measure cannot be replaced by a cousin after it has been dropped or grown proud. The almoner's ladle has a notch everyone recognizes. The brewer's dipper is marked differently, so his gill and the kitchen's gill do not swap stories. When a measure grows slick with age, its integer is recut with a nail in a gentle hand. The bursar writes a little note in the ledger, pint rescribed, no change in kindness. This is how accuracy and comfort shake hands. Harness and pack are half the road. Straps are cut from bullhide and softened over steam, then oiled with thrift. A narrow strap becomes cruelty. A broad strap is a sermon about pressure and flesh. Pack saddles are padded with rush and old felt, stitched with a crosshatch that looks like decoration but is really memory. For where stuffing must not wander. Belly bands are checked for cracks as carefully as bread is checked for bake. A spare thong lives in every pocket that could honor one. A slip buckle on the ridge road is a kind of blasphemy against time. Hooks, pegs, and small iron become leverage against chaos. The smith forges S-hooks as if they were commas that let a sentence breathe. Hang the pot a little lower, lift it a little higher, move it aside so water may speak to flame without scandal. Pegs grow like mushrooms from beams near doors where weight gathers. A peg at shoulder height is for rope. A peg at hip height is for baskets. A peg high up for the cooper's auger, out of children's reach. The monastery knows where hands wander when worried. Pegs train hands to find helpful work. Nails are counted the way eggs are, in dozens and hopes. A small nail mended a loose plank saved a wheel, saved a cart, saved a week. Labels that don't use ink save arguments that would cost food. A braid of blue cord tied to a basket means infirmary, handle gentle. A scrap of red wool sewn to a sack means seed, do not touch without two keys. A twig of rosemary tucked under a barrel's hoop means for the guest house. If it lingers, use first. A little wooden fish tied to a rope means ferry-side use, do not repurpose and strand us on the bank. These are not ornaments. They are common sense made visible. Silence needs signals that can be felt with a thumb at dawn. Floor plans are logistics, too. The cartyard keeps an honest aisle through the middle so that two men with a pawl can pass without asking every barrel to take a breath. The bakehouse has a sill smooth enough that the peel does not stutter when a loaf must be hurried out, and rough enough that a tub will not skate when it is heavy with dough.
The almonry's back room has a threshold low enough to carry out baskets without tilting and high enough to remind a sleepy foot that there is a world beyond it. The scriptorium's doorway is wide enough to admit a barrel of water in drought because ink and charities share thirst. Repair is the season that overlaps all seasons. At noon, when the sun is wrong for sowing and too right for sleeping, a short bench appears under the cloister arch, the mending bench. There, frayed basket rims are repaired with willow thongs, rope ends are seized with whipcord and beeswax, sack mouths get new drawstrings that remember to slide and hold. A novice learns to splice, 3 strands unlaid, then married into 3 waiting strands, the seam fatter at first and then under a brother's thumb, becoming almost invisible. Splicing teaches humility. It also saves coin the house does not have. Cleanliness travels with carrying. Before baskets ever touch food again, they are rinsed in the gray water channel upstream of the mitbed and hung in the loft where smoke drifts and mice consider and reconsider. Barrels slated for water are rinsed with hot water and a rinse of weak vinegar, then rolled gently so their staves taste the sour without sulking. Sacks are beaten on the washing rail to lift the last dust, and the rail gives a particular hollow sound when a sack is truly free of its old story. The infirmary has the right to refuse any vessel. It rarely does. Refusal would be a sermon about someone else's failure. Instead, a quiet look at a stain and a pointed glance at the lye barrel corrects the future without scratches. The rule about nothing without a place,
In famine, time is food. A bell rung at the right minute saves bread from staling, carts from ruts, and bodies from the harm of hurrying. The monastery's hours are older than any brother now breathing, yet they are revised each winter the way a good knife is rehoned, same blade, truer edge. Here, timekeeping is logistics in its most invisible form, dividing breath and daylight so that mercy arrives on schedule, not by accident. The bells are not grand, they are precise. The great bell in the tower speaks for prayer and peril, but under its authority live a family of small voices. The bakehouse handbell with the seam down its flank where it was mended after a fall. The almonry's shallow pity bell whose voice does not startle babes. The stable's iron clapper bar, no music, just an honest thuck. The water post's wooden striker, as discreet as a cleared throat. Each bell has its grammar. Pairs mean prepare. Triplets mean proceed. A single long note means change. In famine, words would be wind, notes travel better. On the west cloister wall hangs a board that is not a map and not a ledger, yet feels like both. Pegs stand in ranks beneath headings burned into the wood with a heated nail. Oven, mill, water, almonry, carts, infirmary, guest house, fields. Each heading has a row of holes for pegs painted in simple colors. A blue peg under water at prime means draw now. A white peg under oven at lauds means heat dome. A red peg under almonry at sext means thin ladle. The pegs move with the house's pulse. No voice reads the board aloud. Hands read it by habit, the way a monk's fingers find the next bead in the dark. The clock that drives this choreography has no gears, you can see. It lives in the sky and in the belly. The sacrist's job is to bind the sky bellies to bells. He keeps a marked candle for each month, trimmed to burn a measured inch per hour when the weather is just. And he keeps a sand glass fat in the waist for days when wind or rain makes the candles lie. More often, he trusts the sun's nail as it climbs the cloister pillar. At the pillar's base, lines scribed with a dull knife say what the eye already knows if it has been taught. Here is terce when shadow kisses the third line. Here is sext when it drinks the fifth. Here is none when it finds the last and lingers. Winter shifts everything later. The sacrist shifts with it, and the pegs follow his hand. Breakfast is not an hour. It is a window between lauds and prime, chosen by the bakehouse rack's whisper. If loaves cool faster in the breath of the north corridor, the bell comes sooner. If the oven soaked in firing and asked for patience, the bell waits. The refectory steward watches the board, counts the men who will come in from the yard with rope-burned palms, and slides an extra spoon of ale into labor bowls without any dignity being asked to notice. The infirmary's bead cords speak to the timetable too. If 3 cords in a row hang heavy with beads at the top, the almonry's pity bell will ring twice between terce and sext to shift the week ahead in the line before chill settles. Carts keep their own liturgy of minutes. Departure hides before dawn where wheels and hooves prefer frost to mud. Return is set by practical astronomy, how far a man can roll without having to guess at ruts. The carter carries a small tally string around his wrist, 7 short knots for the turns where each cart will need a wedge, 1 long knot for the bridge where he must send a boy ahead to look for loose planks, 2 knots together for the ford that becomes a mirror by afternoon and a rumor by night. Each knot, when passed, is slid along the wrist to the back of the hand. When all the knots become a bracelet again, the cart is almost home and the stable bar gets 3 thocks: straw, mash, water. The mill's hours are river hours. When night frost bites the paddles, the brothers wake at logs to break the sheath with poles. The sacrist pushes the mill peg from none to prime because water can be made to remember its duty. When Thos ekes in mush, milling pauses 2 hours after prime to let the race stop sulking. The scribe notes the mark on the board with a diagonal stick of charcoal. The bakehouse reads the mark and turns to handcarns. The kitchen reads it and stretches pottage with a handful more split peas. The almonry reads it and asks the cellarer for 1 basket of yesterday's crumbs to make the soup confident. No one tells anyone anything. The board is a conversation that does not need ears. The guest house's timetable braids with the scriptoriums. Letters write out on days when carts go, never alone, never after none. The sacrist sets a small brass weight in a niche by the board on those mornings. It is shaped like a scallop shell and means seal before prime. The prior sees the shell and signs early, the wax spoon warms before prayers, and the courier tightens his laces as the invitatory still hangs in the air. In this way, paper handshakes meet wooden wheels, and no time is squandered finding ink when a road is waiting. Fatigue is measured as carefully as flour. The workmaster keeps a second, private board, no bigger than a bread peel. On it, pegs bear the names of men and women with their chores for the week scratched in tiny letters. If a peg is rested 3 days near mill and wood, it will not be put near carts on the 4th, unless an hour is carved from somewhere else. A brother who carried water through 2 nights for the infirmary gets an afternoon in the scriptorium repairing quill nibs. Not a reward, not a punishment, but a kindness arranged with sums. The workmaster counts not only muscles, but moods. A man whose song grew short at vespers moves to hedging, where rhythm and knife can speak to his temper. A novice who laughs too readily is given the rope walk, where his hands can learn steady talk. Weather inserts itself into the schedule like a lord who does not knock. When wind rises from the west, the bells speak a new syntax. 2 quick notes from the water post, a triplet from the stable bar if the ridge path ices, a single long beat from the almonry if the line is already forming under a dirty sky. In deep snow, the sacrist dusts the cloister sundial with a glove and feels for the lines with his fingers. Then he listens to the well. Does the bucket's echo answer quicker? The water table has risen. Kitchen hours can be shifted to boil snow and spare the well rope from ice. The board receives the sacrist's verdict. With pegs moved a hold to the right, the house flexes and does not crack. Silence helps the schedule keep its dignity. Without chatter, men are where bells say they should be. A brother feels the hour coming the way a baker feels a loaf done, by nose and habit. The almoner reaches for his famine-marked ladle as the pitiless sun reaches the 5th line on the pillar, and somehow the line outside the wicket has already arranged itself with elders where elders should stand. The laundry basin is ready just when the infirmary's cups return. It would look like magic from the outside. From inside, it's only rehearsal kept honest. Writing time down is forbidden in one place and demanded in another. The refectory keeps no hour marks in view.
Meals belong to grace, not to clocks. But the kitchen door frame wears tiny knife ticks at knee height, once for the moment to fetch wood from the ledger store, twice for the time to skim broth, a small notch shaped like a leaf for the minute to scatter herbs so their scent is generous and not bragging. Novices are told to watch the doorframe as they pass, and in a week they do so without thinking, and the food tastes as if time itself had been seasoned. Children from the village learn the bells as if learning their letters. The schoolroom opens after terce and ends before sext. In famine, the hours teach more than prayers, how a day carries water in its hands without spilling. A chalk circle on the floor stands to the cloister. Small stones are pegs, a twig is the sacrist's hand. The children move the stones and ring a toy bell and begin to see why their mother's bowl is full at sext and not at prime, and why their father's angry talk about the Lord's tithe happens at none when strength runs low, and so should be answered with a quiet place and bread, not with words. The monastery regards this as a catechism of a sort. Night watch is not a sentry, it is a schedule that stays up. When the carts must leave before the moon grudgingly lifts, a rope is tied from the dormitory door to the cart yard, so sleep-heavy feet won't stitch a crooked line through rhyme. The watchman makes a round at intervals set by the sand-glass. At each round he touches 5 places, the bakehouse banked coals, the infirmary brazier stones, the almonry's latch, the guest-house lamp, and the stable's warm ear. He leaves a token at each, a small pebble moved from left to right, so that the workmaster on the morrow can see the night was kind and busy. If a token is unmoved, the day adjusts. More wood, more soup, a word with the man whose thoughts wandered too far from duty. The rule speaks to time in the bluntest of ways. Do not let haste devour accuracy. Do not let scruple starve mercy. From these 2 lines hangs the whole choreography. The sacrist's candle gutters a little at none. He shields it with his palm and advances the peg under carts by 1 hole, because the ridge will have begun to thaw, and a man who leaves now will curse less by dusk. The cellarer's slate records how many minutes the almonry gave to the latecomers yesterday, 5, and today he asked that it give 7, because a funeral at the far hamlet shifted everything by a bell. We do not owe the dead, but we are glad to pay them.